statue? Yeah. Do you know who did this statue? Oh, okay. Um, Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to biblical archaeology and culture. It's been a very hot minute. I think the last time we had a class was back in December. And because the last time we had a class, I'm not really sure where we left off. Though I remember talking about David's kingdom, but I don't remember talking how extensively we talked about David's kingdom, or even if we got to the end of David's kingdom and finished Solomon's kingdom. So we're just going to kind of go over the archaeology and culture stuff in David's kingdom that I already outlined. And if it sounds familiar to you, great. If it doesn't sound familiar to you, that's great too. It means hopefully you're going to learn something new. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask, even those all the way in the back who echo. This is Michelangelo's David. It was made well after David lived as king, and I'm not sure exactly when Michelangelo lived, but I think he was he was an AD artist, not an BC artist, so at least probably close to 1,000 years afterwards. If you go to places like the Vatican, you will see a lot of ancient art, or even art that's like more than 200 years old, often depicts scenes from the Bible, so it's not all that surprising. This is probably not what David looked like as a local chieftain in the Middle East. But, artists tend to make pictures of Jesus like them, or at least in popular culture. It's often why you will see Jesus as Chinese to the Chinese, or black to the Africans, or even white to the Europeans and the North Americans. We don't really know what color he was, but it's what tends to happen in art. So let's talk about David's kingdom. This kind of starts at the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, even though David is a part of this story well before this. Scripture says, "And David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, to which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahiman and Jerel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone who was in the household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judea came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah." So this is basically saying that David was made king in Hebron. And does anybody know how long the Bible says David was king in Hebron before he moved his kind of headquarters to Jerusalem? It was for 7 years. And 7 is always a good guess when it comes to number or length in the Bible. 7, 40, or 12, or 3. Those are probably, you can't go wrong with those numbers. But for 7 years, David was king in Hebron, and then eventually we're going to see him move his kingdom to Judea, and we're going to talk a little bit about here. However, as with almost everything I've talked about, there's going to be people or scholars who disagree with whether or not David was king in Judah. If you don't rely on the Bible as a primary source, you really only have to go on secondary sources, and that means either finding, or primary sources that you either find written by people in the time period, or you find secondary sources that kind of collaborate that evidence. Unfortunately, there are very little to tie David to any kind of kingdom. In fact, the claim often goes, if David was as powerful as the Bible claims, we would certainly see more, and they often attribute to David at best being a local chieftain, and they point out in other places where they believe that the Bible exaggerates claims made by leaders. And they're going to point to people like Solomon or Saul, or even some of the kings that come after them. In fact, a lot of non-biblical scholars only believe that the kingdom of Judah starts with Hezekiah, and I believe it's Omri for the kingdom of the north, which is well after both David's reign. However, fortunately, in the times that have come since this, we've actually found collaborating evidence, or at least evidence to suggest that David was a prominent figure in the line of Judea. The most important out of those is what's called the Dan inscription. This is a tablet. I believe it is called the Dan inscription because it was found in the city of Dan, which is not in the tribe of Dan, because Dan was driven out of their own tribe, and they relocated all the way to the north. Having visited there, it is probably, in my opinion, the most beautiful of the cities I visited. Beautiful ancient cities, not really much of a city now, but it's very lush. There's lots of running water, and of course you can go and see it if you ever go to that area. But they found this inscription. You see up there all the way, Dan. Can you see that all the way in the back? You see where the arrow's pointing to Dan? It was found in 1993 by a Gila cook. I don't know if that's a boy or a girl. I didn't really do all that much. In archaeology, it's normally guys doing the work, but that doesn't mean that there aren't famous women archaeologists. In fact, I did my research paper on one I've mentioned before, and it is, as you can see, basically a fragment of something that's probably been crushed or eroded or maybe repurposed as something else. That dates back to the 9th century BC, which would be in the general time period that David would have been king, or at least sometime shortly after that he would have been king. So what does it say? Well, we only have an idea of what it says. And so you can see here, let's go back. You see how it's broken up, and if you can see the picture, you can see like writings on the picture. Do you see the writings? Okay. You can see where one of them is particularly highlighted, but I mean, it's all across the surface. You can obviously see it broke up. And it's going to read something like, something and cut and something and something. My father went up against him when he fought at, and my father laid down and he went to his ancestors, became sick and died, and the king of Israel entered previously in my father's land, and Hadad made him king, and Hadad went in front of me, and I departed from the 7 of my kingdoms, and I slew 70 kings who harassed thousands of that's them kind of, they have a little bit, and they're kind of guessing at the is what they don't have, and the other part is them filling in blanks, which might be blanks in the grammar or blanks in where the stone is missing. Riots and thousands of horsemen or horses, depending on translation. I killed Jeroham, son of Ahab. Does anybody know who that is? Jeroham, son of Ahab. Does anybody know who that is? That's one of the northern kings. Huh? I'm trying to think of my father's land, and Hadad made me king. I don't know if it mentions who is giving this account. So my guess is it's someone who's not an Israelite, probably someone from the north. Riots and thousands of horsemen and horsemen. I killed Jeroham, son of Ahab, king of Israel, and I killed Ahaziah, son of Jehoiakim, king of the house of David, and I set their town into ruins and turned their land into desolation. So this is our first big clue that it's not specifically talking about David, but it specifically mentions the house of David. Something that you wouldn't really mention if it didn't really exist. You see this a lot like in medieval type writings, and I'm talking like the 600 to like 1600 BC or AD writings, where people were the house of this place, or maybe even a coat of arms. Like your coat of arms might represent what kind of house you represent and where that house is a descendant from. So you would only put it the most important one normally. And in this case, he says, even though he's the son of the king, it's more specifically that he's differentiating from the king of Israel to the house of David, or in this case, the king of Judah. And he turned their land into desolation. And Jehu led over Israel, and I laid siege upon. There's probably a few people that could be. This could reference, who's that king? Snackarnib? I don't think it's King Snackarnib, because we actually have something on King Snackarnib. We have we're going to talk about that when we talk about Hezekiah. We know that if you read the biblical accounts, that the nations were often at war with the surrounding nations. Who's around them? You have Edom that's around them. You have Moab that's around them. You have the Assyrians to the north. You have the Babylonians to the east. You have Egyptians to the south. The Phoenicians, the Maetians to the west and northwest. So I'm not really sure who particularly is referenced in this inscription, but that was a very good question. I'm surprised actually I don't know. And now I feel like an idiot for not knowing. So we have basically a little bit of biblical collaboration. So I do have some scripture on here with the biblical collaboration. At the time, King Hazael of Aram came up and attacked Gath and captured it, and Hazael proceeded to march on Jerusalem. Thereupon King Josiah of Judah took all the objects that had been concentrated in by his predecessors, King Jehoshaphat, Jerome, and Azziah of Judah, and by himself, and all the gold that was there in the treasuries of the temple of God and of the royal palace, and he sent them to King Hazael of Aram when turned back from his march on Jerusalem. So that's probably the biblical collaboration right there. David's kingdom, if we believe that David was a real king, and David there was a palace that David does seem to reference, because at one time he was on the roof of his palace. We believe that the kingdom of David is what falls into the old city of Jerusalem, or the old area of Jerusalem. I took some pictures when I was there. You can kind of see it. It's mostly old style architecture that really hasn't upheld through time. Does that make any sense? You look at something, you might see, like you go to Athens and you might see the Temple of Athena, and it's like this big block structure that's still pretty much standing today, even though most of it is gone. But if you look at this looks like rubble. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. This looks like rubble. So this would probably indicate a much older style of architecture and dating. And you can see time has not been very good to it. In fact, I believe they built some walls and fences to try to keep it up and preserve what's there. I took a picture, and I'm like, I turned to my professor and I go, "What do you think that whole thing is?" And he goes, "It's exactly what you think it is." So if you can't figure out what that is, I would say your first guess is probably the correct one. What I found really, really interesting was this thing that is now called Warren Shaft. It's called Warren Shaft because it was named after the person who discovered it. But what's really, really interesting about this is there is archaeological evidence to support this. So where was David when he became king? Do you remember? We just talked about it. When David was made king, where was he? Hebron. Correct. Good job. Did you look at the answer? You wrote it down? All right. It says, however, we read in 1 Chronicles a very interesting account. It said, David and all of Israel went up to Jerusalem, that is Jebus, where the Jebusites were, and the inhabitants of the land, and the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, you will not come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David, and David said, whoever strikes the Jebusites first shall be chief and commander. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went up first. That's a very, very important phrase that we're going to read about that. Went up first, so he became king. This account is kind of collaborated in 2 Samuel, where it says, and the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites and the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, you will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off, thinking David cannot come here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. And David said on this day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft. You see where that's kind of indicating? To attack the lame and the blind who were halted by David's soul. So, when they discovered the old city of David, they actually made two other discoveries. The first of those discoveries was what's called Worn Shaft. It is I think it was probably like an old well or something. Because if you go down the bottom, there's a bunch of water that leads to that comes from the Gihon Spring. Does anybody know about the Gihon Spring?
That's the one where the lame went to wait for it to bubble up?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it's in Solomon's portico. Yeah, you might actually be right. It might actually be that same one. I'll have to double check that, but I was thinking specifically the Gihon Spring is where Hezekiah built a tunnel through the rock, and he stopped up all the water outside of Jerusalem, and he tunneled water into the city and through the Gihon Spring, so when the enemies came and sieged Jerusalem, they wouldn't have water, but the city would have water. So that was the second discovery they kind of made through this. So they found this called Worn Shaft, which they believe is the shaft that David and more specifically, Joab, climbed to get into Jerusalem in the first place and to take the city. Specifically because this is found in the old city, logically, it makes sense. But as far as archaeological evidence goes, we have very little that offered that than, I believe there's like a bracelet thing that they found that says like House of David. But other than Worn Shaft and the Dan's tablet, there's not a whole lot to indicate that this is necessarily a thriving kingdom 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. But I mean, you can see in these pictures that this is what the old city. This city, it's quite possible this city existed in the time of David, but this city also could have been built by the Jebusites, the people who Jerusalem is named after. So it is what it is. We have, moving into Solomon. Solomon is what's called the Great Builder. We have a lot more evidence, I think, for Solomon. So we see here, Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and the chief Cherethites, and I'm going to say all these great names terribly, and the Pelethites went down and had Solomon ride on King David's mule and brought him to Gihon. Oh, there's that word again. And Zadok the priest took the horn of the oil from the tent and anointed Solomon, and they blew the trumpet, and all the people said, "Long live King Solomon!" And all the people went up after him, playing on pipes, and rejoiced in great noise, so that the earth was split by their noise. I don't know why I indicated that highlight part. Oh, I remember why. Because that was something I didn't know before. and I always like highlighting new things. It's not something you kind of think about when you read it, like, oh, that's kind of a neat tidbit of history. I wonder what that means. It probably just means they were very, very loud. So Solomon's empire. You can see that this is historically where we give Solomon's empire, where this map is, how can you see this map okay back there? Thank you. I appreciate it. That you have basically three different colors. The red territory, the orange territory, and the yellow territory. The red territory is typically associated with Saul's kingdom. You can see it's not very big. It was their first kingdom, and it's probably because they were not united as a people, and the enemies of the land were pushing them out. And Saul's got his work fighting back, especially against one group of people in particular, and that group was the... Nobody? Who was Saul's greatest enemy? The Philistines. There you go. That's a gold star for you, Miss Carlita. And then you have in orange, you have David's map where you can see David expanded that kingdom by quite a bit. I think he more than doubled the size, if I had to guess, going all the way into the Sinai Peninsula, up past Tyre, into the area of Lebanon, and probably pushing close to the Euphrates. If I had to guess what that river was right there, that's probably the Euphrates. And then, of course, Solomon added to that kingdom by a third, often through what? Anybody's guess? No wrong answer here. Oh, I mean, there's probably one answer more right than another. How did Solomon increase his land the most? Through marriage, political alliances. That's probably how his land grew so much more than Saul's. As far as we know, Saul only had one wife. He only had one kid. And no, he had a few other kids, but one only kid worth mentioning. And David, we know, had, I don't know how many wives David had. I never really thought about it. He had a few. I can only think of two, and that's Abigail and, no, I can only think of three, and I can't even remember one of them's name. Abigail, Bathsheba, his first wife that ended up resenting him, and I can't remember her name. Oh, that's going to bother me. But I know he had more than that. So, Solomon the builder, and this is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon drafted to build the house of the Lord in his own house, and the Milo, and the walls of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. That's very, very important right there. In fact, I want you, in archaeology terms, that's probably one of the most important verses that we're going to see for collaboration. So I would encourage you to make a note of that. Bonus question, why is Solomon the one that's building the temple? Yes, God said David had too much blood on his hands. So by contrast, that we know Solomon was a king of peace. It doesn't mean he was a good king, it just means that he largely avoided war, and we know he avoided war through political alliances. So there's something that you're going to see that you'll see in this picture right here. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is done by something called the Madden Project, or Madian Project, that goes and does archaeological work and archaeological digs and recovery and restorations. And they've noted that if you go to Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer, you will see that the city gates are all very, very similar. All those ancient cities had two things largely protecting them. First one was a gate. The second thing was the walls, the high walls. So, to get into the city, you had to go through a series of gates. I think Jerusalem was such a large city that it had 12 gates. But most of these smaller cities probably at most had one or two. And you can especially see that Solomon, who the builder says built these things here in verse 9:15, there is collaborating archaeological evidence to show that, hey, I can't necessarily say Solomon built these, but the designs are so similar that probably the same person is responsible for building them. At the very least, the person who writes this verse firmly believes that it is Solomon who did build these cities. And he's probably right, because that knowledge would have been passed down from probably one generation to the next by the people who lived there, especially when Solomon is considered to be one of the greatest kings in the Bible. Other than that, it's a little bit harder. Oh yeah, here's more. Here's a close-up of that gate system in Hazor. Do you see it? That probably what it was an interlocking gate system. You guys ever go to the base and they have you go from one spot to the next spot to the next spot? Have you ever seen that? I see it at army bases all the time. I don't know if I've seen it anywhere else. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's kind of like you have to drive like this, like a maze. What do you think the purpose of that is? To slow you down. So you can't just ram right through, or to attack the base, you're going to go through a series of barriers. So that's what we call this interlocking system, and that's probably exactly what something like this was to keep people from just barging right in.
So the previous photo that you showed wasn't the gates, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't locking like this.
No, it would have been, well, it might have locked like that, but it was probably more like, yeah.
It was horizontal on the earth
Mm-hmm.
instead of vertical.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So there's a picture of that. There's one at Megiddo. You can see it very, very similar. These gates would have been largely made of wood and iron. Well, iron if it was available, wood if it wasn't, like thick wood that would have either been eroded after time. Wood doesn't really, unless wood becomes petrified, it doesn't tend to last more than a century or two. It decomposes very, very quickly. And if it was iron, the iron probably would have been scrapped or repurposed into something else. But you can still see a lot of the stonework that is still there today. And Gizor, not neatly as compact as these are. But yeah. So we have, this is Jerusalem, the temple, and the palace. Now, it's really cool. If you ever get a chance to go to Jerusalem, go to Jerusalem. You will see so many neat things. It's such a neat city to explore. Yes, there's political stuff, but you're probably, as long as you're going to stay in the main parts, you're probably going to be okay. If you go to Jerusalem, you're going to see the Temple Mount. It's very hard to miss. You can pretty much see it from any angle of the city you're on. And since some of the parts in Jerusalem are higher up than others, you can even see it from the outskirts of the city looking down into the city. And you can go, if you are a male, well, even if you're a female, you can go up to the Temple Mount. You can go to what is called the Wailing Wall or the Westing Wall, and then you will have to separate by male and female. And if you want to pay a little bit more money, you can go to the top of the Temple Mount, where the Temple of Solomon was probably built. However, that is where the extension of any archaeological evidence or exploration immediately comes to a grinding halt.
Yeah.
Do you guys know why? It's fine if you don't.
Well, that's a Muslim.
No. because of this particular building right here. This building with its big yellow dome is called the Dome of the Rock, and it sits squarely on top of the Temple Mount. And because, as of today, the Muslims still control the top of the Temple Mount, there is no option for any archaeological archaeological discovery to take place in that particular area. To them, this building is, I don't think it's the first most important place, but I know it's in the top 3. So as long as that still happens, they will probably never see what was left of Solomon's temple, which, Solomon's temple, if you actually look at the physical dimensions, isn't very big in the first place. The whole thing would fit in this room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But it definitely is not even nearly as big as Herod's temple, built almost 1,000 years later, that existed in the time of Jesus, which probably covered a lot of the Temple Mount, and was eventually destroyed when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. So, it says Solomon built the temple, and it said he built the palace, but doing any kind of archaeological dig or reconstruction where we're pretty sure it might be is not going to happen. Short of some kind of holy war of the Jews kicking all the Muslims out of Jerusalem and whatever's going on in there becoming very, very one-sided. I don't want to get into the politics of that what we know now is probably all we are ever going to know.
I don't know where, but I think I read somewhere where the Temple Mount is thought to be where Abraham took Isaac to sacrifice. Have you seen that?
What mountain does it say he took him to? I don't remember the name of the mountain, because I thought it does say where he took him to sacrifice. I just don't remember.
It does, but I don't remember either.
Yeah.
But it did say that in the Bible. But
Well, this is Mount Moriah. Jerusalem is built on Mount Moriah, or Mount Zion. But, both are correct. So I suppose, maybe, I don't know how they would know that, because supposedly this was a private event between Abraham, Isaac, and the angel who stopped them. So Abraham, Isaac, and God. But I suppose it's a possibility. Jebusites have been around for a long time before David. Maybe they were around the time of Abraham. The other thing that is mentioned here in this verse was he built in his own house and the Milo in the walls of Jerusalem. So we have this phrase Milo. The Pharaoh's daughter went up from the city of David to her own house that Solomon had built her. Then he built the Milo. Well, what's the Milo? The Milo in the walls of Jerusalem. So again, we have here the Median project, which you can see here. This is probably the Milo, or what has been termed the Milo. And people have different guesses on what it is. I heard some people call it a mill, and I don't think that's probably correct. I think that they call it a mill because of Milo. I've heard some people just call it a location. I've heard some people just call it of just the Pharaoh's house. The wording of it here would make that really, really strange. So what it is really anybody's guess. There's probably some guesses that are better than others. I don't really want to go into them, just to say, hey, here's this thing that we found that has been collaborated by the Bible, probably. Solomon's temple. You can see Solomon's temple right there. It includes a large courtyard with an altar and a basin, and two parts inside and outside. You have the court, you have the inner chamber, and then you have the Holy of Holies. Said that Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that he had anointed him king in place of his father, and Hiram always loved David. And Solomon sent word to Hiram, you know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. Now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. Well, right now anyway. He's about to have a lot of misfortune by the end of this section. And so I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord as my God, as the Lord said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your palace, shall build the house for my name. The Bible says that the house was constructed with a lot of different men, 3,000 different men to be precise. This is what is, what's the word that we use for forced military? It's conscripted labor. Was David recruited men from 11 of the 12 tribes to come and work on the house of the Lord. And do you know which tribe he didn't recruit from? He didn't recruit from Judah. He didn't recruit the people where the temple was being built. So we built with 3,000 men in shifts, with 7,000 burden bearers and 8,000 stone cutters. So they used cedar and cypress timber sent from boats from Tyre to Lebanon. We can see this in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Zev, which is the 2nd month, he began to build in the house of the Lord. Interestingly enough, I learned in my undergrad program when I was taking I think I was taking Kings as a course. I had to read this book called The Mysterious Number of the Hebrew Kings. And the book was trying to line up the co-regencies, because if you just do the actual math, it doesn't work out. And one of the things that they pointed out was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are running completely different calendars. And they were about 6 months apart. And so that's why sometimes they might be a year off. So when it says the month of Zev, I'm wondering, like, Nishan and Tishra, I think is what they were the first months in those two calendars, and which one it is on the actual one. So, because the northern kingdom was running one kingdom and the southern kingdom was running another one. So in the 2nd month, the month of Zev, which he began to build the house of the Lord. As you can see, the dimensions are 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. You guys know how long a cubit is? It's supposed to be this long. So, let's say a little bit more than 12 inches. Somewhere between 12 and 18 inches tends to be the average. That would make it really, really hard to have a standard. And I wonder who was the man that they used to define a cubit. But anyway, 26 cubits long, 20 cubits high, 30 cubits high. Prep work was done away from the temple. A lot of people believe that some of that stone took a very, very long time to build, and it was often transported by sometimes water or even ice in a sled. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool or iron was heard in the house while it was being built. Probably, so they could still use it. But we have no indication that it was being used. The Bible gives no indication that it was used, I believe, except for this verse here. It took them about 7 years to complete, which, given given ancient times, this is actually quite a feat. You guys take that road or that bridge. You guys know that bridge leading into Columbia?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you're driving to Columbia and you go over that bridge, where, yeah, 378, that was under construction. It was under construction when I first came here, and then almost 2 years later, it was still under construction. And do you know how long it took them to do that road? I have no clue. That's why I'm asking you. Quite some time. So keep in mind that by modern standards, they were probably even up to par what they were doing, especially with what they had. But they had forced conscription. We have unions. Unions say we work on our own time. That's not a benefit. And it probably ended up looking something like this. A lot of gold trim, a lot of bronze trim. It's no wonder that when Hezekiah showed the emissary of Babylon what the temple looked like, that the emissary, not the emissary, I believe it's Isaiah, chastises Hezekiah for doing that, because you don't show your enemies your wealth, or don't show your robber where you keep all the nice stuff. And there are people that have built reconstructions of this based on the dimensions. I've seen a number of these reconstructions. Some of them are really nice. When I go to PTP, Polishing the Pulpit, they always have one built so the kids can see what the actual temple was like, and it gets you an idea of how big it actually was. Yeah, it's to scale. They put it in this really big room. I think the room might be as tall as this room, but it's much bigger. It's probably, the room it's in is probably easily the size of this church. It's like this giant conference hall. So, like I said, we have no proof that this temple existed today, and because of the stuff going on in the area, it's going to be impossible forever to find evidence unless something drastically changes in in our lifetime. I doubt we'll ever see it. Of course, there's going to be people who doubted that Solomon built it. They won't doubt that it exists. There's too much evidence to suggest it existed, just that it was Solomon who built it, and even if he did build it, it was modest, not as the size and scope it described. And we did do some early excavations of the temple, and that was before what's going on now, back when things were a lot easier. And they've found not really a trace of the temple. But of course, there's a really good explanation for that too, and that's because of Herod's temple was probably built on top of it. We can find some evidence of temples in the area that mimic the size and scope of it, and even for the time period, not necessarily associated with Jerusalem. So there is that. We can also tell through cultural anthropology that smaller places were instructed to take down their higher places, the typical place to go and worship, because the idea was that worship was supposed to be centralized inside of Jerusalem, except maybe like local days of worship like Sabbath, where they later create something. That's a good idea. I wonder when they started creating synagogues. I'm going to have to look that one up. The temple shifting project. So, since one of the things that they've noticed is that, especially in the Muslim-controlled parts of Jerusalem, they have taken all this rubble and for building projects, and they dug it up and they moved it to like a dump site without any care for the world. So some people said, hey, there might actually be something there that you're digging up. And so they, especially from the Temple Mount area, not the Temple Mount itself, but in the general area. And so this university, this Israeli university, founded the Temple Mount Sifting Project 20 years ago, 21 years ago. Though it started, like I said, before that, in 1999, when they were digging dirt up with bulldozers. That makes me so sad. Do you know when the Chinese first started discovering mammoths, how they dug up the mammoths? With power washers.
Wow.
Yeah. Archaeology has come a very long way. So they were digging it up with bulldozers, and so they first started sifting through this stuff that they have found, and they have found quite a lot of interesting stuff. They found a lot of coins. It says they found more than, that just got really loud, 5,000 coins. They found jewelry, they found figurines, they found arrowheads, they found tools and clothing and game pieces, and they have found a whole lot of pottery. Pottery is especially important because pottery is changed quite consistently through time and through area, so we can compare pottery to a different form of pottery, and just by looking at the pottery style, we can give a rough estimate of when that particular piece of pottery was made. Pottery dating is a very accepted tool for dating how old something is. And in the temple sifting project, they have found the Emir seal impression. And that's called Emir because it belonged to the Lilahu. Anybody else having a great way to say that? Where it says that we do know this of this person, because this person is mentioned in the Bible, Pashur. The priest was son of Emir, who was the chief officer in the house of the Lord, heard Jeremiah prophesying these things mentioned in Jeremiah 20, verse 1. So this is roughly 300 years after Solomon, but still in that time period. And if he was the chief officer in the house of the Lord, that means at least by his time period, we have archaeological evidence that the temple existed. They also found things ranging from 10th century BC into the destruction of the temple almost 400 years later. This includes largely pottery, like I said, 15%. Jugs, juglets, fragmented terracotta figures, smashed normally. Some say probably even smashed on purpose, especially if these were terracotta figures of false gods. Pot handles with specific incision markings, which may indicate cultic designs. Stone slingshots, shekel stone weights, arrowheads, and a lot of other finds. So here are some of the things that they have found. That's an arrowhead. I think that's a seal. Don't quote. No, that's a weight. It's a weight. Yeah. Now, I don't know if I have enough time to talk about this, but this is very important. I started getting really big into archaeology in the early 2000s. And one of the things to find out about archaeology was to subscribe to biblical archaeology. Starting in about 2000, so I started subscribing to the Biblical Archaeology magazine. Starting around, I'm guessing here, 2008, there started to be a scandal in the archaeological community. Picture this: 70 years ago, we'll say 70 years ago, so 1950s. Were any of you alive in the 1950s? You were?
54.
Okay. 57? Oh, hey, you're the same age as my mom. um, we're walking around the marketplace in, let's say, Athens or Corinth or Jerusalem, and you see this guy selling on his street, and he says, I have this really old scroll that I found. And he goes, would you like to buy it from me? And you're like, oh, well, that sounds cool. Let me take that. Or I found this really old doll. Would you like to buy it from me? Or I found this thing that's from the priest of David. Well, how do you know it's from the priest of David? Well, it says so right here. Well, now, okay, maybe you have a really old scroll, but do you really have this item that belongs to the priest of David that specifically says it's from the priest of David? Now you're starting to be very, very suspicious about what the guy is selling, because anybody can have something that's old. You can go to Greece or Jerusalem today and you can find a very old piece of pottery and pick it up. You're not allowed to, but you could, and you could take it back. But the odds that that pottery has something written on it, especially something written on it that is important, is very, very, very small. And if it's real, it's probably worth a lot of money. You think? So what do you think is happening in this time period? Forgeries. Lots and lots of forgeries. So, we've had a really frustrating time telling what is in archaeology, not we, but the archaeological community has had a really frustrated time telling on what's real and what's not real. And I want to talk about this one in particular, even though we're not here yet, because this is probably the most famous one of all the accused forgeries This is called an ossuary. For those of you who don't know, an ossuary is it's a bone box. It's basically a coffin, but not in the way that we would use a coffin. Typically, we bury a body in the coffin and we leave that coffin alone forever and ever. We don't ever touch it again, right? Typically, what they would do is they would put the body in the tomb until the body decayed enough where they could clean the bones, and then they would put the bones in a bone box. And sometimes that bone box was shared, sometimes it wasn't, but it was basically a way to preserve the body after death. Their version of preserving it, that not preserving the body, but preserving the remains of the dead. Bone boxes are found everywhere, or some form of bone boxes are found everywhere, especially in the Middle East. This particular one that you see here is very, very important because it says, Yaakov, son of Yosef, brother of Yeshua. Now, having a bone box with something written on it is rare. If something is written on it, it's normally the name of the person who's in the box, or maybe the name of the family who the box belongs to. Even more rare, if that person was related to someone famous, it would include another name on top of that. So, this one says, I believe this is James, son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. How much do you think this thing's going to be worth? It's priceless. There is no number you could put, if this is actually what it is. Yeah. Oh, I mean, if this is actually what it is, then there is nothing in the world that could define a price limit on it. It's probably one of the most rarest things that we have, if it is exactly what it claims to be. It was originally presented in 2002. This is when I graduated high school. And as a direct archaeological link to the historical Jesus. The historical Jesus is that Jesus was a real person who really lived. He just wasn't the Son of God. So, it's Jerusalem. It was probably presented by Jews to other Jews. They don't deny that Jesus was a real person. They just deny that he's the Son of God. Muslims are the same way. Of those found at the time, there was more than 3,000 of them found. Only one other mentions a relative other than a father. And I believe it was Herod's brother. Yeah. So it will normally mention the person inside. It will also normally mention who they were the son of, but it's very, very rare to mention someone else unless that person is very, very famous. So this became a very hotly debated artifact. Is it real or is it fake? And people were saying, well, it's real. And most people will agree that this artifact is real. What they don't agree on is this last part. Brother of Yeshua. So that's what they debate of whether or not is fake.
How big is that box? Just out of curiosity.
I actually don't know. I know it's not very big. I think you could probably hold it in one hand. Or not, well, both your hands. It's not, like I said, a full-size coffin. It's not meant to be a full-size coffin. But I don't actually know how big these boats are. I've never seen one, but you could probably go get the dimensions. So, what did they decide? Well, first they decided it was a fake. For the longest time, that was the position on it, that it is a fake. And some people today believe it is still a fake. Largely because if you look at the historical context of this particular bone box, there's no way to trace it to its original source. It wasn't found in the field. It was probably found by somebody in the market. Just because it was found in the market doesn't also mean that it's not a forgery either. It's just that it's more likely to be a forgery if it is found in the market. Eventually, they changed their mind on it, and now they're saying it's real. So I don't know. We'll see if that holds. But I want to talk more about this, especially with this next one that we're going to find, because this one actually goes to Solomon's temple, and this is going to have the same hotly debated topic. But we're out of time. Any questions?
Just a comment, that process when you're talking about the bone box.
Yeah.
Bones, it reminds me, it's similar to what they do in New Orleans because of the sea level they have.
No. Oh, because they have to worry about coffins coming up?